Welcome to the Sonder podcast. An epic story that continues invisibly around you, like an anthill sprawling deep underground, with elaborate passageways to thousands of other lives. I'm your host, Alexander Robertson, and this is where strangers become stories. Welcome back to our discussion with Simon Morgan, ex-Royal Protection Officer, where we continue our discussion into his fascinating life. So in 2011, obviously the Cambridges got married. I believe you were involved in that. And what was the sort of biggest difficulties that you guys faced from a security perspective?
Oh, I mean, everything really. You know, you're putting every senior member of the royal family in one place at the same time. You're putting every senior government minister, every senior military leader, and then a myriad of guests from around the world, all in the same place, all at the same time. And you know, you've got to get them there. You know, they don't just appear there. You've got to get them there. You've got to control that piece as well. Plus, there's a public aspect. People want ownership. People want ownership of those, state occasions. So you put it all in what is ultimately a very small area, within central London. You bring all these dignitaries, all the great and the good, and then you bring members of the public into it as well. So, it is a complex security environment whereby everybody has to work together. Everybody has to know what their roles are. You've put in lots of mitigation. Your contingencies start at number one and work all the way through, and everybody needs to know where that is. Again, you're relying on everybody doing their job because each person has a key role. Yes, it maybe ends with a protection officer at the end, but it may have started with the intelligence officer in an office. It may have started with one of the uniformed officers on a barrier. It may have been, a firearms officer, a rifle officer up on a roof looking at something. Everybody has to do.
It's a huge machine, I imagine.
It's a huge machine, and I've got to admit, I think we do it very well here in the UK. We have state occasions such as Trooping of the Colour, state visits. We have all these every year. So when you do get a grand occasion like the Cambridge's wedding, you're actually bolting on and enhancing and developing some of the other things that you do as a matter of course throughout the year. And you've just got to make sure that the plan that you put in place is fit for purpose. You've got to make sure that it's being developed. And certainly from an intelligence perspective, taking everything into account that's going on your doorstep, all the way out to internationally. Yeah. Just because it's not happening here doesn't mean it's not going to have a knock-on effect, kind of here. So so it really is vast. But I do think in the UK, we do it very well, and and over the last couple of years, we had the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Unfortunately, then we had the Queen's funeral, and then we had the King's coronation, all within a very short time frame.
And also, I guess as a bodyguard, you're very much like as you say, you're in these rooms. You're a fly on the wall. You're seeing things that most people don't. Is there like a most memorable experience for you during that royalty protection part of your career?
Eating is always challenging because sometimes you don't get to eat. That's one of the things because you could be rolling from event to event and you've got to make sure you have a hearty breakfast because you might not eat again until the end of the day. You do become a little bit of a scavenger. How many people can eat without actually moving your mouth?
Did they feed you well?
You do get kind of fed well on the occasions, you do get looked after, but sometimes there just isn't the time to eat.
Yeah, because you're always on.
You'll be in a scenario whereby, you may be just grabbing the odd canapé and you'll be eating it and, that member of the royal family knows exactly what you're doing and will look at you to see whether you can actually, eat that food without moving your lips. So again, it just becomes part of that rapport between you. But you go into an environment, and I think, I was most probably quite basic in my approach to life. I'd come off a firearms team. One minute you're working in some of the not so nice places in London, and then you're sitting at the top table. Yeah. And I think most probably my eating habits changed quite considerably. I was never a big fan of salmon. Yeah. Whenever you go to a an event. You'll normally have a salmon starter, followed by a steak and then some form of followed by some form of beef dish, and then a cold dessert. And I just didn't like salmon. Just didn't like salmon. However, when you haven't eaten for 8 hours, you'll eat salmon. You'll eat something that you would not normally ever eat, and you'll eat it in chunks because you don't really like it. But also, you're potentially sitting at a table whereby someone has given up their space to accommodate you as the protection officer, so you can be near your principal.
Yeah.
So it'd be extremely discourteous to push your food around the plate and not really eat it. So you eat things that you don't.
So difficult to do as well, because you're managing all that etiquette and things like that. So there's a question that I've been really looking forward to asking you, which you might not answer, of course. However, your pride in British policing, I think, will enable you to do so.
Okay.
Obviously, Donald Trump had a bit of a scare recently.
Twice.
And as an outsider and a layman who has no idea about the world that you work in, it would appear to me that the protection surrounding him was very disorganised. And I was wondering if you had an analysis or an overview of what happened there and what should have been done differently, potentially.
You've got to look at that in each individual part. If you work your way to the end product, the protection team, both in terms of the attempted assassination in Pennsylvania and then the issue that they encountered down in Florida, the protection team did their job. That's what I would expect them to do. So when you look at Pennsylvania, you have 4 core competencies as a protection team. The first one is to react spontaneously, that's what that protection team did. The second that incident started to unfold, they reacted spontaneously. They provided effective cover, completely surrounded the president and made sure that nobody could take another kind of, or nobody could get a shot to him. The threat was neutralized, not by them, but by somebody else. And then consideration for principle. Are you okay? Where are you injured, and so on and so forth. So from that aspect, all those core competencies were achieved, and that's what you'd expect to achieve. But any incident that you have like that will always have an element of chaos. You've got a scenario whereby people's reaction to conflict comes in 3 forms: fight, flight, or freeze. As a professional, you've had freeze taken out of you, and you've got to make the decision whether you fight or whether you flight. Now, from a principal's perspective, you'll never quite know what they're going to do. Are they going to fight? Are they going to flight? Are they going to freeze? From Trump's perspective, you saw that initial freeze because he couldn't actually ascertain what had gone on. There was some form of cognitive delay at that point. All his sensories are going on. There must be a degree of sensory shutdown. Actually, what has just happened to me here? And you feel him, you see him touch his ear, and you see him have a look at the blood. So in circumstances like that, a lot of people will have sensory shutdown because their brain can simply not process the information that their eyes or ears are seeing to elicit a response, which could be to duck down, move out of the way, so on and so forth. Then you have a scenario whereby he doesn't flight because obviously the team are around him, but he's almost fighting to a certain extent. He comes up and gives it the, make America great kind of again. You'll never know what your principal is going to do. But from a team's perspective, they've done that. But you will always see chaos. Because different people are doing different things, and your training is still taking part, but it's not as choreographed as it is in the films scenario. Yes, you've got to look at the wider security plan as to how did somebody get on that roof and completely unchallenged, and again, that threat was neutralized by part of the Secret Service team, the rifle officers on the roof. But as we go through it and as we learn more day by day, somebody noticed him on the roof, but nobody challenged him, nobody communicated that. Now that's part of the wider policing plan.
So that's not the close protection team.
No, the close protection team did what, that Secret Service team did what I would expect them to do. And when we look at that piece in Florida as well, albeit information is a lot more scant around that, but certainly an advanced team member has been pushing out ahead, identified the weapon barrel, discharged their weapon. So again, reacted spontaneously, provided effective cover by challenging and discharging a weapon. They've neutralized that threat because the threat has run away. And then consideration for principal. They've got the principal away, put him into hard cover, and so on and so forth. So all those core competencies have been fulfilled. The bigger question is, how did that individual get there? How were they not identified before? What happened to the containment? Was that area swept? Did they maintain its integrity, and so on and so forth? So yes, from a layman's perspective, it may not look as if they've done their job. And it may look extremely chaotic, but from a professional's perspective, you've got to cut that back and have a look and see what they did. But then you've also got to evaluate that whole operation, and ask the questions around that.
Yeah, I mean, you used the movie adage a bit earlier. I mean, when we had coffee together, say a month ago, one thing I always see you doing is you're always scanning the environment, which I imagine is a huge part of being a close protection officer. What are you looking for?
You're looking for what you expect to see and what you don't expect to see. All those, that assimilation of information and that coming to a conclusion and deciding, what is a problem, what isn't a problem, is constantly running through your brain. That's your frame of reference. That's why you're constantly training. That's why you are learning from history. If you don't learn from history, then you're failing to learn. There's lots of assassinations, there's lots of attempted assassinations, there's lots of breakthrough at certain events and things like this. You've got to look at those and think, okay, well, what went well and what could have gone better. But when you're in that environment, you're looking for what you expect to see. Okay, this is this room. I expect to see this. I expect to see this kind of people in here. I expect to hear that noise. All those I'm kind of comfortable with. And then for what you're not expecting to see, all of a sudden if you have a noise that you're not expecting. Similarly, as much as silence, all of a sudden if everything goes quiet, if you notice somebody that doesn't fit the profile of who you expect to see there, or an object that doesn't fit within that environment. So, that's where you're constantly looking at things and you're evaluating that information because you've ultimately got to make a decision on it.
And then for our listeners' sake and their personal safety, is there something that you'd say is a real red flag, like a body language thing, or something that if you see, that's something, alarm bells are ringing?
I think it's more simple than that, to be honest with you. I think in the current world that we live in, I think situational awareness is most probably key. Who's in your space, who's exiting your space, and who's coming into your space. Those are things that I think are really important. Because
spatial awareness.
Yeah, because a lot of things that happen on a criminal side of things have to happen quite up close and personal. If somebody's going to steal your phone, they have to come to you and physically take it out of your hand. If someone's going to, steal your bag, they have to physically maybe take it off you. Even if somebody's going to, stab you, they have to do that quite close. And if you're not aware of what's going on around you because you've got your AirPods in and you're not taking in all these environmental changes. If you are looking at Instagram and laughing at dancing cats or goldfish blowing bubbles, and you're focused on that, and again, that's quite a generational thing these days. I think situational awareness is quite important, and we have a tendency not to do it. Yeah. How many people do you bump into walking down the street because they're on their phones and their heads are in their phones? And they may be doing something quite worthwhile because generationally, you'd use a map. You get a bit of nice folded bit, and you'd work out where you're going. Yeah. Now you just do it all on your phone. So a lot of people are looking where they're going, but actually they're not looking where they're going.
Yeah, I think that was such an interesting realization for me. And you spoke about that at the beginning. You're not just a bodyguard. You're a Metropolitan Police officer. So your initial training is being a police officer. So that must inform a lot.
You've got to be an experienced police officer before you go into either of the protection departments. Again, it's not just a case of you don't just leave training school and you've got to. Your policing path is, yes, you go to training school, or certainly in my day, you go to training school for 20 weeks. Then you go out onto your borough, which for me was Leytonstone out in East London. You do a 10 weeks street duties course, whereby you're with a senior officer, but in terms of service, and they puppy walk you. They tell you how it is, and you do that for 10 weeks. Then you have your probationary period, which is 2 years. And then after that, you get told, you have passed. You get attainment to being a constable. Then, in theory, the world's your oyster.
Yeah.
You can then go off and be a detective, join traffic, or whatever you want to do. The reality is no, because when you're getting into those specialist roles, you have to have a degree of grounding to allow you to go and do those specialist roles, which I think, personally, is where the police service has very much lost its way at the moment. You can become a detective. Yeah. You can join the police as a detective. Yeah. Well, I get you're being brought into a specific role, but you don't have any experience of what policing and all the issues is all about. You can join policing as a superintendent.
Oh, wow.
Now, that's a senior management board position.
Having never walked the walk, so to speak.
Yeah, and making decisions on things you know absolutely nothing about, but obviously you're a manager. Could you imagine any other business bringing in somebody with no experience of their business or their role at a CEO level or COO level?
I hadn't appreciated that.
Yeah, it's been, I think, a complete and utter disaster. And lots of policing's problems do stem from that. But at the moment, I think we're in a bit of unfortunately, a bums on seats scenario. When I joined the police, I joined because I wanted to. I didn't respond to any recruitment billboard or anything that kind of popped up on my social media. I joined the police because I wanted to, and lots of my generation did. And I think, I always say, I joined the police because I wanted to. You join the police now because you can. Yeah. And that is vastly different.
I mean, it's interesting because, obviously a lot has happened. When we spoke earlier about the acid attack, the equipment you're using, technology has moved on so much in the period that you were a police officer and now are a close protection officer. Mm-hmm. So what role does technology now play? And what would you say is the biggest vital difference?
I mean, it plays a part, but, being me, being of the age that I am, I still think you need somebody like me at the end of it. We talk about if there's no response, there's no deterrent. It's great watching somebody commit a crime, and gathering all that evidence. But if you haven't got anybody to go and arrest them, if you haven't got anybody to go and investigate them, if you haven't got anybody to bring them to court, you're just creating a load of home movies, for want of a better word. Yeah. And I think that's where, again, we've kind of lost our way. If you look at public order, for argument's sake, everything now is, we'll deal with it after the event. We'll deal with it after the event. But a lot of the people, we don't know who these people are. You're dealing with what? I appreciate the scenario, and commanders, to a certain extent, public order, are quite risk averse. Yes, I accept they don't want to send arrest teams into crowds and pull the perpetrators out. But, somebody could be at large for the next 12, 18 months. They could never be caught because they can't be identified.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's also changed the environment massively. I mean, all this social media, online presence. I mean, if I use the example of the Kim Kardashian robbery in Paris, that seems to me to be very linked to her overt profile.
It does, and you're looking at a scenario whereby you're actually sharing all that information. You're not being secretive about what you're doing. You're sharing your life with everyone. That's the social media way now. But that's fine as long as you put some form of mitigation in place. But if you keep on sharing your life, and from a criminal's perspective, you're looking at there's two forms of criminal activity. So you're looking at ad hoc criminality and organised crime. Ad hoc criminality is day, date, time, place. Two people meet and something kind of happens. That's the equivalent of us walking out of here and turning right instead of left. It's almost a twist of fate to a certain extent. When you're talking about organised crime, that's something different completely. By very definition, it's organised. And to a certain extent, it's run on a same structure that lots of other businesses are run, because crime is a business. It's there to make money. So, it's run on a very similar lines. You'll have, a CEO who's in charge. You may have a chief operating officer who starts putting things on the ground. You'll have somebody who will be logistics. You'll have somebody who's finance. But what you'll have is that biggest piece is intelligence, and how that intelligence is traded is how these organized crime groups survive, and a lot of the time they don't actually have to go very far to find it because lots of people are giving it to them.
And you're giving them free access basically to private space.
And around that, there's two types of intelligence. There's direct and there's indirect. Direct intelligence is you live in this house, you drive this car, and you associate in these areas. That's very difficult to change that profile. Indirect intelligence is your social media, is allowing people into your house to drop off parcels who then share that information inadvertently when they're in the pub or at the cafe or someone else.
And I guess geolocation tagging, things like that.
All these things kind of take a part, So yeah, when we're sharing our lives with people, we have to put a degree of mitigation in place, and again, for us, from a client's perspective, we want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And we have to say, okay, I accept this is what you want to do, because some people are a brand at the end of the day, and I fully understand that. They have to say they're wearing this, they're driving that, they've eaten here. But then you have to put that mitigation in place, and that could be a delayed response. Do you have to say that you were eating there today, or could you do it tomorrow? What kind of physical security measures, along with technical, do you put around your home and kind of your vehicle, all the way up to having a full security detail. But that depends on your needs. Yeah. But yeah, technology plays a part, both in terms of what we do, but you still need someone at the end of it. Yeah. Complete reliance on technology goes back to my point. If there's no response, there's no deterrent.
So we'll definitely pass on to our listeners then, be careful what you put online, because people are watching you.
Yeah, they are.
And you can give them an edge into your home.
People are out there and they're constantly harvesting that information. They're constantly harvesting where you go. And these organised crime groups are building up portfolios. They're building up targets. And sometimes they may trade that because, a group that is looking at you, for argument's sake, may be watch thieves. But actually, kind of, they've noticed that actually you haven't got a good watch collection, but you do collect art. So they may trade that information to an art team, and it may come down to a simple business deal of give us 10% off the top with whatever you get, or next time you get a watch job, let us have it. We'll trade that, and this is the way it works.
So interesting.
And people don't understand that. It's a kind of, a lot of people think, it was just a bit of bad luck. But when you strip it back, actually they've been looking at you and profiling you for a long time until they get to that point. And I think a lot of people are very concerned about cybercrime and about phishing and whaling and so on and so forth, because obviously there's large amounts of money to be earned about that. But we still need to look at the physical side of things, because the trauma that physical intervention, that home invasion, that robbery within the street, the mental trauma that can leave with people, sometimes it doesn't leave you.
No.
As opposed to, you may be able to put to one side the fact that you've been conned, online and under a phishing scam. You may be able to deal with that. But if somebody's hurt you or hurt your partner and you've witnessed that, how do you get that out of your mind?
Very traumatizing.
The psychological damage is kind of quite high.
I mean, talk about trauma. I think, very publicised moment, but obviously that tragic moment when Diana was chased by paparazzi and obviously then her life was ended. I know that you had to deal with a lot of paparazzi in your role with the royal family, and I know a lot of your clients that you deal with now also very public figures, and you also have to deal with them again. What threat do they pose in your view, and how do you mitigate that?
I mean, they form a threat in that they form a distraction. That's one of the things. There are lots of threats out there, and there are some people who genuinely wish to do you harm, and obviously you have members of the paparazzi who wish to take your picture. You've got to balance all these things, but what you can't do is get too distracted by that latter group, and therefore take your eye out on the people who generally wish to do you harm. So you have to work with them. Which is sometimes, to some of my former colleagues in royalty and even now on the private sector, a little bit distasteful. You feel you're shaking hands with the devil. But, they have a job to do as much as you have a job to do. The money that circulates around some of these pictures. And we are talking about the paparazzi as opposed to the official press who are signed up to various kind of conventions and so on about pictures that they will use and won't use and how they get them and so on and so forth. But, with regards to the paparazzi, all bets are off. They will do whatever they want to do because some of those pictures are worth hundreds of thousands, millions of pounds if they end up being syndicated or that's the last picture of that individual kind of alive.
Wow.
They're worth a lot of money to people. And you've really got to set your stall out and say, look, I really don't, I can't stop you doing what you're doing. We can put certain things in place depending, if you're on private property and so on and so forth. But, you've got your job to do. I accept you're going to take a picture of us. Yeah. What I don't want you to do is step over that line because I'm here to do my job. What I don't want you to do is chase in the car. What I don't want you to do is, trying to break in and so on and so forth.
So you work with them.
You've got to work with them to create the end result that you want. And again, put boundaries kind of in place. Now, some will respect that and some won't. And again, you've got to put mitigation and contingencies in place kind of to deal with that. But you've got to understand the sheer volume of money that is involved with, paparazzi style photographs and people's thirst. Because at the end of the day, the paparazzi only exists because people have desire to have these pictures. Until you cut off that source, then it will continue to exist. But it's always a cat and mouse kind of battle. But of course, what you can't do is get sucked into that battle because
can't take your eye off the ball.
Yeah, because as we know, going back to the instance in Paris, it does have tragic consequences.
Yeah. So rugby player, police officer, close protection officer, and also entrepreneur and business owner. You started your own consultancy.
Yeah.
Why did you do that? And what sort of people do you work with now?
I mean, it was just, to my mind, a natural progression. It was something that when I started this journey in policing, I had in my mind that that's the way I wanted to go. Get my credibility from royalty protection and then take that out into the private sector. So from a Trojan consultancy perspective, I say we look after people of wealth, visibility and status and their associated security requirements. So, that's what we're looking at, because when you look at wealth, visibility and status, all three are intrinsically linked.
Yeah.
You won't find one without the other. And again, it's working with those people. It's it's understanding what the threat and risk is around them, because that's got to be a foundation stone for us to work to. So we establish, what that threat is. Is it specific or generic? Is it actual or perceived? So we establish all these things, and then we look at how likely the threat is around those things, and we build security processes around that. Again, as we touched on earlier on, a client for me has to value what we do. If they don't value what we do, we're a very expensive fashion accessory.
Yeah.
But also, not just that, you just don't get the traction that you need because you're actually serving a different end goal.
Yeah.
So for us, we like to work with clients, sit down, establish what their concerns are, and then put something in for them that is usable, because security at our level is a lifestyle choice. If you don't get it right, it becomes very, very unwielding, very unforgiving, and ultimately unusable. So we always want to make sure that what we put in place is right, and that is, having those conversations with a client, and saying, right, okay, well, how do you live? What do you do? How do you envisage walking up to your front door?
Because they're people.
What does this look like? It is, and you can't just create an algorithm for them or say, well, hey, this worked for the last person, let's just take this box and place it over, because that's when it becomes unusable, and then all of a sudden it's something that they deem to be a waste of money.
Yeah.
So,
and I know you're far too discreet to say this, but you do this for some of the most publicly recognised people in the world, which is pretty interesting.
We're very fortunate. We have a lot of very good private clients. We have a lot of good corporate clients. We get to work all over the world.
Yeah.
It's great for the team because, again, coming out of those roles of either at royalty protection or ministerial protection, you're very much used to working around the world. You know, you do have a global footprint. You're used to working with other stakeholders that aren't necessarily in the UK.
Yeah.
You have the ability to communicate because you have that understanding, you know, and we just take all that skill set that was built up over many, many years and now put that into the private sector to the benefit of our clients.
Incredible training. And, you know, you've done so much, Simon. Out of all this that you've done, all the stuff we've discussed, what has been your most rewarding moment?
You know, lots of things have been rewarding for all different reasons. You know, I think joining the police, you know, was a highlight. You know, I'm still exceptionally proud to have been a Metropolitan Police officer. You know, and I still am now. You know, I think it was a great achievement. You know, you were selected. You achieved kind of through that bit. Yeah, you know, that was a great bit. You know, getting a degree. You know, I never thought I'd get a degree. You know, I got a degree in sports science when I only use it really to go to the gym, but, you know, much to my mother's disgust. But, you know, that was a tremendous achievement because, you know, certainly, you know, looking back to my education, it wasn't a standout education, you know, but to achieve that was good. And then, you know, you come down to the personal things, you know, meeting my wife, having a successful marriage, having 3 children, you know, all those things are achievements. They're rewarding as well, you know. So I think, you know, going back to how we started, you know, police officers are human and they have, you know, human traits, you know, and therefore it's not all about the job itself. And you know, there are other aspects kind of to it. And, you know, certainly having a family, I think is really important because you've got to be able to step away and you've got to be able to know actually, why are you doing this? Because, you know, to be a police officer, to go and deal with some other people's families, you know, certainly in a response role or, you know, on the firearms team or something like that, you know, you've got to step away from your own family, you know, so they haven't got you for that time whilst you're dealing with, you know, somebody's domestic dispute or something along those lines. So, you know, I think it's really important to have a good, strong family background because, you know, you've got to, and sometimes you've got to, you know, unburden yourself with some things. Not that I'm particularly good at that, but, you know, you've sometimes got to say, well, I've had a bit of a tough day, you know, and actually, you know, you look at your children and you think, okay, this is why I had that tough day. You know, it was worth it.
I think, you know, that's so interesting and nice to hear, Simon, because that's exactly what we want to get to the bottom of here at Sonder. You know, so many podcasts talk about what's in vogue or what's success. And really what we really like to know actually who is a person.
Yeah.
You know, how fascinating. Like today, you know, I've been able to speak to you, who's such a fascinating person about that, and understand that life. You're not just a uniform, you're not just a police
No, you're not,
officer.
and that's really important, you know, and that's really important, you know, and yeah, that's where people kind of get lost. I think, you know, certainly when, you know, you're a police officer and you're a uniformed police officer, you're extremely visible and people will take out their frustrations on you and it's your fault and so on and so on. You haven't done enough. You know, you are a human being at the end of the day and you're trying your best, you know, maybe for that person who's in crisis at that particular time. You know, and people seem to forget that as well. But, you know, yeah, we are human. And I think that's really important. If you weren't human, you couldn't be a police officer.
Yeah.
Because by very definition, you've got to deal with other humans.
It's such a human role, actually.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. You know, and like I said, I think people forget. I think people forget.
And bearing that in mind, you know, what characteristics do you have personally, innately, or that you've actively developed over your career that you found really helpful in regards to what you do?
I mean, I have a drive to succeed. That's the biggest thing. You know, I think you've got to know why you're getting up in the morning. You know, and I've always had that. You know, right, this is the reason why I'm getting up. I know what I want to do and where I want to go. Again, I think that's really important. You know, I had the police career I wanted to. You know, every stage was what I wanted to do. Now, being in the Metropolitan Police Service, I was afforded some huge opportunities. You know, and some. You know, working in some great departments with some great people, you know, really people who are at the top of their top of their game, you know, exceptional, talented police officers. But yeah, I think those are most probably my two main traits. You know, I'm not particularly good at losing. I try not to do that kind of at all. You know, most probably one of the downsides, I don't like taking a backward step. You know, I always take a forward step. And, you know, sometimes that's maybe kind of to my detriment. But, you know, that's a characteristic. But also, I think for me, I have that understanding of what my job is. And it is my job. And after that, I have other things that kind of go with it. So I have I feel a degree of vision about who I am and what I am and where it fits in. And I think that's very important as well.
You have a real strong identity of self.
Yeah, kind of pretty good. You know, I'm pretty comfortable with myself as to kind of who I am. I like myself. I like my own company as well. I don't have that, you know, as a problem. I don't mind being on my own as much as I like being with other people. I have no issues about being on my own. But yeah, you know, I know where I want to go.
Yeah. I mean, your career, more than probably a lot of careers, probably has led to you being in a lot of intense, high-pressure situations. Mm-hmm. You know, in that environment, obviously you've got phenomenal training and things like that. What tools and techniques do you use to keep calm, composed, and on target?
I mean, I try and stay fit. You know, even now the age that I am, I still try and stay fit, because I think that's really important. You know, if you have a healthy body and a healthy mind, there's no contradiction with your brain telling your body you can't do this anymore. You're not fit enough to do this. You're not strong enough to do this. So I think that's really important, because a lot of the day-to-day stresses and strains, I think you can only cope with if you're physically and mentally fit, let alone the exertions of what your job is required to entail.
It's a very physical role.
It is.
Isn't it?
It is. You know, but I always sleep. So despite what has gone on during the day, I can always sleep.
Sleep is great.
And that I think that's important. It winds my wife up. You know, she's like, well, how can you just literally go to bed and go to sleep? I said, because at that point, when I do that, I'm tired. Yeah. That's why I've gone to bed. And I know that rest is as important as the activity that you need to do to kind of be active. So, you know, I think you've got to have your rest. And you know, and that's a mechanism as well. And certainly, yes, nice to have sleep, but sometimes you can only get a little bit of downtime, you know, and that little bit of downtime, you've got to empty your mind of everything at that point. Otherwise, it can get a little bit congested. And
do you have a way you do that? Is there a way you start switching off?
I just do, you know, not you know, there's no kind of expert opinion to this. I'm not a meditator or anything like that. You know, I literally just say, right, that's it. My day's finished, done. I'll deal with that now tomorrow. But similarly, you don't take that with you. You know, if it can be dealt with today, deal with it today. But otherwise, once you've packed everything up and it's settled in your mind, then you know that's your day complete, that's your work complete, and the rest you can kind of do tomorrow.
I love that. One of the questions I really like asking on this podcast is, you know, how do you define success? And has that changed at all over your career and life?
I've achieved everything I wanted to. Certainly from a policing concept. You know, I think I was successful in that police career. My success now in the private sector most probably still has to be written. Well,
I think externally it looks very successful to me, Simon.
So we shall see how that story unfolds.
Yeah. Now, was there a moment in your career that really tested your personal and professional values, and how did you then navigate that situation?
Again, without wishing to step away from that, nothing sticks in my mind. You know, each time you apply for a different role, you're leaving where you are, you know, at the top of your tree and starting again. That's always difficult to kind of do, you know, especially when kind of people know you and you know, reputation being on one unit and then another unit and so on and so forth. But, you know, I've never found that an issue to a certain extent. But there's never been anything defining for me. Now, whether that's, you know, hey, I've just been lucky. Like I said, I had the career I wanted to. Every time I went to go somewhere, I succeeded in going somewhere. So that major disappointment piece for me has never happened. That's not to say it couldn't happen tomorrow, and we'll have to see how you deal with it. But I think I've just been fortunate. and I've had nowhere whereby I thought, gosh, that hasn't worked out. We need to readdress that. So for me, there's no standout kind of point. I think if I wanted to put a title on it, everything is hard.
Yeah.
Everything, because of what you choose to do.
Yeah.
So I think therefore everything is hard, and I've constantly challenged myself to do it. And like I said, that reason for getting up each day is just another challenge.
We've learned so much about all of this today, and it strikes me it's such a physical role. It's such a human role. It's got a huge amount of emotion in, much more than I expected. So how do you balance that? You have so many facets in your life, family man, you're a business owner, you obviously have had that career in doing what you do. How do you balance that, or how do you try to balance that?
Well, try is the key word.
Yeah.
Try is the key word. To get that balance right is really difficult. Some days, some weeks, some months you get it right, and others you don't. When there's a time frame due to work that you're away, I always try and make sure I'm home for important family occasions, birthdays, anniversary, Christmas. I'll always try and be off for Christmas, and that was something that I tried in the police. I had no issues with working New Year, and again on some of the teams I was on, there was always a trade-off. Some people definitely wanted to work Christmas and off New Year, as opposed to I'm quite happy to work New Year. I don't get New Year. I don't get how the clock strikes and then all of a sudden everything is better, or things are banished, and it's just another day. So again, that's my kind of mentality, and I'm sure lots of people would disagree. So trying to get it right is, that's a constant battle. Making sure you're home, and that's where that personal professional battle always exists. And like with lots of other people, some days you get it right, and other days you don't even come close to getting it right.
No. I mean, as we all know, life is difficult, and there are certain moments that are phenomenal, and then there are moments that are absolutely god-awful. Mm-hmm. What is your go-to when that's the case? When you're having a really bad day, is there a person, a place, or something you like to go and do that helps you?
I mean, when I'm having bad days, the dog gets a lot of walks. So, again, I like being on my own. I have no issues with being on my own, and sometimes it's good to give that clearer thinking, or indeed don't think about anything at all. I'm fortunate where I live. We live in the countryside, so I can step away from London, and that was something that was always really important to me. Yes, you're a Metropolitan Police officer, you're working in the heart of London, but we've always lived outside of London. So do you have a break?
Clear divide.
Yes, you don't see it every day. Whilst where I live, yes, there's a police force, and most probably has very similar issues to some parts of London. But you have a tendency not to notice them. They're kind of not my problem. My problem is here. It's not there. But yeah, certainly going to the gym is another time. And also I've always tried to keep my non-police friends. I was recently at a friend's wedding vow renewal. These were people that I was in school with. So they've been friends
in Swansea.
In Swansea. So we went back down there, kind of a group of and we still keep in touch. We don't maybe see each other 3 or 4 times a year because everybody's kind of scattered. And indeed, one of our friends kind of lives out in Canada, but she came over kind of for that. So I still always try and keep my non-police friends, because sometimes when everybody's a police officer and that's all you talk about is policing things, and how maybe, the job isn't going particularly well at the moment, or when do you retire, and so on and so forth.
So very much a bubble.
So I've always kind of, kept non-policing friends, which I think is quite valuable. And I'm sure lots of other police officers kind of do the same. Otherwise, you're having, the same conversations, just with slightly different people.
And you need to be able to step back, I imagine.
You do. You've got to have
intense.
that. You've got to have that break, because it is so intense. And I think that's really important, to have a group of friends that aren't police officers and have a totally different perspective on life, which therefore keeps you with a totally different perspective on life. Rather than just being, Robocop to a certain extent, and the only thing you focus on is being in the police, and maybe the next specialist role, or the next promotion, or indeed just the next pay packet.
So
you've got to have that break. You've got to have that break, or it'll eat you up and spit you out at the other end.
And to that note, then, our listeners love this question in particular. Is there a piece of advice that you were given that has just stuck with you over the years and that you just want to pass on?
Going back to my dad, really, my dad said, if you want a career, you've got to go to the Met. And that was because of the opportunities that the Met afforded you, as opposed to South Wales Police or even Gloucestershire Police. They have literally everything here. So whilst you have a layman's view of what policing is about, right, okay, well, I can be a detective, I can join traffic, I can be a dog handler. Once you get in here and see it all, there's lots of different things. You can be on kind of Thames Division, you can be a diver, you can be a boat skipper, you can join firearms team, you can be an armed response vehicle officer, you can be an instructor, you can be a CTSFO, and all of a sudden just proliferate. So my dad's advice was based around my career and the opportunity. Don't narrow yourself. Look at everything and then decide.
Chase the career.
Yeah, and then decide what you want to do. Because for me that didn't change. I knew where I wanted to go, and for me it was join the police, public order unit, firearms and protection. That was it. But that's not to say at any point I could have said, actually, I kind of, I fancy being a detective, or a surveillance officer or something like that.
And allowed you to work it out as you went along.
Well, yeah, because you see it and you see, well, does that work for me? And, and so on and so forth. Would I be good at that or would I not be good at that? So my dad's advice was ultimately, I suppose, follow your dreams and look at all the opportunities. Don't just say with blinkers on, I'm just going to do this. Look at all the opportunities and make a decision from there.
Stood you in very good stead.
Well, I think so. My dad's a very quiet individual, but, what he does say is kind of worth listening to.
Yeah. Is there something that you believe in that probably is a bit unfashionable or you don't think people agree with anymore?
Standards.
Yeah, just standards.
Standards.
As in dress, etiquette?
Everything. Standards.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a wide term, but I think standards are really important.
Yeah.
You've got to have some, and like you said, that's your standard of dress, your standard of appearance, the way you speak to people, your personal standards, your moral standards. I think that's really, really important. And I think, the reason I have such umbrage around that statement is when I look at policing at the moment, I think standards. What are the standards of being a police officer these days? And I think, you have to portray the right image because you're in a position of authority. And for me, kind of standards. Everywhere I've been, it's always been about standards.
Yeah. And to get to where you did as well and be so highly specialised, that must have played a massive role. Yeah,
very much so. Very much so. Because the standards that you have to adhere to, the standards that you have to attain are really important in that job you do. Even if you come down to your target classification, if you don't achieve that standard, you're not going operational.
Not good enough. Yeah.
It's as simple as that. And I think standards now, we just seem to be in a scenario that if people can't pass it, we take the standard away or we lower the standard.
Yeah.
And then several, phases down the line, we question why that happened. And when you look back, it's because we changed that standard and that person wasn't up to that standard, but we changed it. And this is
and that's just a reality thing.
This is the end result now, and I think, standards.
So in the theory of Sonder, you have, it's the idea that everyone's living life like a movie, and everyone has a role to play in their life, villain, hero, leader. What would you see yourself as?
I suppose it depends on the context. If you look at my professional life, then, very much in the forefront of everything. But in my personal life, I like being in the background. I like being the nobody. Yeah. Just someone who just watches the world go by. I think that, sometimes I'd like to have more of that than being in the, I should imagine in all the things you've just talked about, I must probably fit into everybody's different criteria, hero, villain, nice person, nasty person, all that kind of piece. But I think I would argue I have two personas. I have a professional one and I have a personal, private one. That's me professionally. Now, there are traits that leak into my personal one, but my personal one, I think, is low key. I like to be low key. I like to be
no fuss,
anonymous, no fuss. That's great because a lot of my time is taking up being that professional person. Making sure that everything is right, making sure that everything you say and do is right.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's actually nice just to be
Just
part of the crowd,
yeah.
and just watching it, And I suppose at times, and I've said this to other people, at times I don't know who I am. I don't know who I am because it's changed over time, and I'm different things to different people. But do I know who I am? Yeah. Most probably not.
But also such a clearly, defined self of sense as well. So it's interesting. That.
But yeah, I've said to people before, actually, I don't know who I am.
Yeah.
So yeah, perhaps that's it.
That's interesting. We have a question for you from Richard Harvey, who we interviewed a few weeks ago. And he wanted to ask you, is there something about yourself that people would find surprising and you might find slightly embarrassing?
Oh, gosh.
I thought it was quite a good one.
Lots of different kind of questions in the same one. I'm dyslexic, which I didn't find out until I joined the police. So I'd managed to get through all the way through school, university, and it wasn't until I joined the police I get a little bit embarrassed around that, albeit my family think it's hilarious. Certainly when the children were younger, I used to give different bedtime stories. It was the same book, but different stories, different outcomes. Does that embarrass me? Not really, because it is who I am. I suppose maybe the one that you could say now over the mists of time is that when I was younger, I used to breed and show budgies.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
With my dad. So that was
interesting.
When I was younger, yeah, we used to breed and show budgies, and we had a particular strain of Latino kind of budgies that were yellow with red eyes.
Oh wow, that's so cool.
That was a while ago. That was my dad and my thing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, that's nice. So, having answered that great question with that brilliant reply, would you like to ask the next guest a question?
Equally as crippling.
Yeah, okay. Absolutely, as crippling as possible.
Yeah. I suppose something along the lines of, you are what you are, but if you could be something different, what would you be?
Interesting. I like that one. Excellent. Well, we will look forward to asking that and feeding it back to you, Simon.
Okay, thank you very much.
So on that note, thank you so much for being here, Simon.
No, my pleasure.
It's been so fun, so exciting. I've got to been able to ask you a load of questions that I've been dying to ask you, but wouldn't have because it would be too rude otherwise.
It's a lot to get in over a coffee.
A lot. But what a great showcase into that small, very specialised world that is your career and life and work. And so thank you so much for giving us an insight into that. If you guys would like to meet Simon or get to know him, there will be a lot of information in the episode description. And the last thing I'll say is we appreciate all our listeners tuning in, rating us, supporting us. That allows us to have these brilliant chats and tell these stories that you all like listening to. So thank you very much, and I look forward to you tuning in next time.